Greetings everyone. I welcome you very much to the Beechingwood Archery Collection, and hopefully you will have the inspiration to take up archery yourselves sometime in the future. I started my archery career some 6 decades ago, and many of the items which I initially shot with are within the collection. My longbow, my first recurve bow, it was a Jack Yeoman bow, and also my recurve bow. And the TS4 was the favourite bow which managed to bring archery scores to their highest, which was attained in England, which was over 1,000 for a York round, and for ladies approximately about 900 for the Hereford round for ladies. This was the recurve bow, which was manufactured by Les Harris of Marksman Bows. That's his premier bow, which is a TS4, Olympic TS4, which managed the archers to shoot over 1,000 York, and it was a bow that was considered to be one of his finest bows that came out from his workshops. The Olympic TS4, a very beautiful bow made by craftsmen. The basis of the arrangement within the Beechingwood Archery Collection was the fact that I was unable to purchase a house that had an agricultural occupational condition, which enabled me to obviously to take it over and to occupy it by the planting of a woodland, a native woodland, which adjoins the shooting range. And in so doing, it enabled me to alter the whole interior of the building, and so the rooms within the house were completely removed, and the gallery was thus formed. And since then it has been extended by a further ground floor extension, which is now regarded as a picture gallery. The centre of the main gallery is housing the longbows, both ladies' and gentlemen's bows, and also with racks along the outside, which accommodate archery accessories, including a rack of arrows, which are displayed, and beneath one of the racks there are tollware, which are tin quivers, and that collection of tin quivers represents possibly one of the finest collections in England. Many bows which have come my way have either been in a loft, or alternatively into a mews, in other words where horses were kept, and as a consequence they do get attacked by insects, and accordingly they have to be treated to make them worthy of presentation. Overall, the ladies' bows have always arrived in good condition, generally speaking, because ladies were using a lighter weight bow, and more so that they weren't broken. And obviously the number of ladies shooting in the Victorian era and Edwardian era exceeded those of men shooting. It was regarded as a recreation for ladies, and because it was one of gentility, and furthermore it was health giving, simply because TB was, I'm afraid, was rampant within the Victorian era, and people in actual fact took up archery because it's as an outside pursuit, and was regarded by breathing exercises to combat TB, tuberculosis. Men, unfortunately, weren't involved a great deal with archery, possibly in relation to ladies. They represented possibly a 50%. So Ladies dominated the archery scene, and men were there participating. Obviously, a lot of men were lost within the Napoleonic War. That's gentry, and as a consequence, it was the gentry of that time that supported, and then the nobility supported archery, because it was regarded as a regal sport, and many princes and princesses practiced archery, which included the Prince of Wales, who was then to become George IV, and he was the patron of the Royal Kentish Bowmen as well as the Royal British Bowmen, and it was he who encouraged ladies to join the Royal British Bowmen, and unfortunately the Royal Kentish Bowmen ceased, in actual fact, towards the end of the 19th century, simply because of the Napoleonic Wars. Commissions were obviously purchased and not acquired by the skill of war. Bows were made for the Royal Company. They employed their own bowyers, and as a consequence, the overall performance of the Scottish bowyers were extremely good. The Welsh nation has taken an interest always in archery, and it was the Welsh archers who performed brilliantly in the Battle of Agincourt, and Henry recruited bowyers from the Welsh countries, and it was they who helped English archers to defeat the French armies, who were outnumbering the English by 5 to 1. You imagine that flying through the air. No, that battle was Agincourt, a very, very brutal war, and particularly for the poor French nobility. They were absolutely crucified. It was indeed something which had encouraged archery during the 100 Years' War with the French, but eventually it was only Henry VIII who had a belief in the power of the English longbow, and he was importing bows, in actual fact, or bow staves, in from Spain and also from Italy, which I'm pleased to say have been conserved by the recovery of the Mary Rose. But that was really the end of the longbow, because although the musket ball hadn't really came into dominance, it was the large cannons on the Mary Rose that caused it to tip over, and the weight of the cannon was very heavy, so one could imagine all the cannonballs which were on board, and also the cannons on the ground, on the lower decks, middle deck and upper decks, caused disturbance, and it was top heavy, and away it went. But of course it preserved so many artifacts in the Solent that I'm pleased to say have been recovered, and many hundreds of longbows were saved. The library here is dedicated to the memory of Fred Lake. Fred Lake was the bibliographer of the collection of books which were printed, the Bibliography of Archery, which is a collection of all the archery books that have been printed since the period from Henry VIII. Henry VIII engaged Robert Ascham to teach Princess Elizabeth, on whom he was dedicated, and may have realised that one day she could possibly be queen. So he gave her an excellent education and brought down Roger Ascham, who was in that capacity the principal within the University of Cambridge to teach Princess Elizabeth not only Latin but French and Spanish as well as English. And he was also instructing her in history of the United Kingdom and also for Europe. And he was very gifted in his teaching to a very talented Princess Elizabeth. He also introduced her to archery, knowing that her father, Henry VIII, was also a very active participant in archery, and Henry VIII commissioned him to write a book on the subject of archery. And he was so delighted at the book he wrote, which is called Toxophilus, which was printed in the 1650s. He gave him a stipend for the rest of his life. It wasn't engaged in a fortune. I think it was somewhere in the region of a few guineas per annum, but that was a large sum of money to be awarded, to an intellectual. But Roger Ascham formed the basis of shooting, of standing, drawing, aiming, holding and loosing. That is the basis, in actual fact, of archery, the method of shooting even today. He also gave an elementary history of the bow itself. So we owe much to Roger Ascham for bringing archery into the 19th and the 20th centuries. And that formed the basis of shooting technique throughout the period of the medieval 100-Year War, and also throughout the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries. The more modern sporting archery artefacts which are here within the museum, without going back into history, you can't really identify or take the reality of the skill which goes into the making of the new longbow without referring to history. And I've endeavoured to try to collect items which have come in from other parts of the world. It's quite remarkable how the use of the bow spread out from, shall we say, Africa. And it was the first really invention by man to conquer nature. And the bow and arrow managed not only to feed man, the Homo sapien, and also Neanderthals. We don't know whether the Neanderthals used bows or not, but we do know that they were living in proximity and even paired together. There's obviously a history there between Neanderthals and also with Homo sapiens. But interestingly enough, I always thought the bow could have been somewhere in the region between, say, 12 to 20,000 years of age when it was innovated. But apparently it goes back further, simply because archaeologists and also found, in actual fact, in the Rhone Valley, by digging down in some of the graves, arrow points indicate their age to be 50,000 years of age. So we're thinking about going back a long time, and that was indeed enlightening to me and to many other, shall we say, historians, to know that the bow was possibly used over 50,000 years ago. We're looking into a case here where there are a Mongolian bow and also Chinese bows, or two Chinese bows. You will see as I said, the shape of the bow, and the top and lower limbs, of course, come away from the handle centre, which is called stiff, and then laminated round and created into the form of shape of the limbs, to give a better cast. And the cast is the speed of which the limbs will return, and therefore they give a greater speed to the arrow leaving the bow. So that bow there would be somewhere in the region in the age of the early or late period of the 17th century and also into the 18th century. So the bow at the back is again Chinese. Interestingly, you will see in the handle that it is hinged. Now that bow there would have been used by warriors of the dynasties in the Chinese period and history, and they were used in warfare. They were being easily carried by archers who were riding horses, and they did it very, very efficiently. Genghis Khan, as you possibly may have known, conquered really right the way through into Europe. I think they reached Czechoslovakia. That bow at the back, which you've just visualised in this display case, is one which is exceptional. They're not often found, and I'm very pleased to say that one has joined the museum here that was formerly owned by Edward McEwen. Now, Edward McEwen, or Ted McEwen as we knew him, was a collector and a historian in his own right. He ventured into the interior of Mongolia, etc., and I think he even reached into China, to study the bows which were there in the 1970s and the 1980s, and he was a leading exponent and a historian on these particular bows. He had a very, very fine collection, and that particular bow came from one of his collections. And the bow which is in his upper shelf of this cabinet is a Mongolian bow. So we'll move away from this particular cabinet, in fact up to the medal room, where I would just like to mention some historic facts. Fortunately, there is an example of Egyptian bows which is in the adjacent room to the principal oriental room. Now, those who know their history would be aware that Lord Carnarvon sponsored financially the uncovering of Tutankhamun's tomb. They took nearly 5 years to find it in the Valley of the Kings, but eventually yielded the find which gave us a lot more information, not only for the life of Tutankhamun himself, but also of the treasures that were restored there. Now, by good fortune, and I'm not quite sure now how this has come to me, but it is a treasured item here. Fortunately, Lord Carnarvon was also a member of the Royal Company of Archers, and he brought back to Scotland various items from the tomb of Tutankhamun, and there is within this case here, which I hope will be revealed by the camera, these which were presented to the Balfour brothers by Lord Carnarvon in 1936, and by good fortune they're now here to be viewed. Interestingly, the Egyptians who were experimenting with various woods, I mean, if you think his bows are 4,000 years of age, the wood has shrunk, and particularly of the carob wood. But the carob wood has been so designed that it is a recurved bow. That one which is furthest from the camera in the middle distance is a wood, I would think again of carob wood, but obviously it is of greater strength than the one which is nearest the camera, and the effectiveness of the bow can be seen by reference to this card, which shows an Egyptian archer shooting his bow. We will now go back into the ethnic room once again. I always think to myself, they do resemble possibly the modern torpedo. So we could say that possibly they're torpedo quivers, but no, they are really Japanese. And this snap comes apart at the top here, and the arrows go through here on the side and slip inside. So if I hold an arrow up, these are tournament arrows, and that would go into that particular case, like that. So they are still manufactured by craftsmen in Japan, and the art of making these particular quivers would have been over a period of at least 3 centuries, or even longer. These particular arrows here are tournament arrows. I mentioned, in an earlier conversation, which I've been relating, that they have an archery ranges in Ecuador which are covered. Very, very long galleries. The galleries make provision for shooting in adverse weathers, not only from wind, but also from rain. And that's how they gain their skill. These are warfare, and obviously the Japanese were skilled in warfare too. And unfortunately, although they were Japanese living in 3 basic islands, they didn't always find themselves compatible with their neighbours. So there would be outbreaks of war. And they were also designed to keep away invaders, from entering into Japan. That would have been from China. So you can see the length of the arrow used by these very, very tall bows. So the archer would be pulling back to his ear, and possibly further. But they gain great proficiency. Those arrows there would be of the age, I would think, of the end of the 17th and beginning of the 18th century. There are other arrows here which demand inspection, and you can see if workmanship, which is in fact into the arrowhead. They have very long feathers, obviously, for birds of that area, and the actual design of the arrow is excellent. You can see in actual fact how the arrow was let in to the lower part of the shaft and how it's been bound at the bottom. Now those arrowheads would be handmade. Again, they're a collector's piece, but the various types of arrowheads were designed for various purposes. So that will be it for trying to penetrate archers who are wearing armour. Not armour as we would know it, because they were laminates again of wood and horn, etc., but very, very strong. Japanese armour would hold back an arrow which would be shot from, say, 30 or 40 metres away. This showroom is an extension of artefacts, archery artefacts, from the lower ground floor. And this was formerly the lounge to the house. So you can see that the demand for space has been ever growing. In the corner here are arrow boxes, and these arrow boxes were very important in the Victorian era for transporting or having arrows to be delivered by Royal Mail, and they were ever popular boxes used for the storage of arrows throughout the United Kingdom, and the strength of the boxes denotes the actual craftsmanship in their manufacture, and they still retain a strong sentiment today for the storage of arrows, particularly Victorian and post-Second World War arrows, which were made by F.H. Ayres, and certainly during the period when Aldred was so popular with the manufacture of arrows. Fortunately, during my lifetime I've been more than privileged to be able to collect as many as I possibly can, if necessary to have them repaired and to be restored to where they can still be admired. This particular box here, as you can see, was supplied with a handle and for carrying, and these were carried by archers, onto the archery ground, and within you'll see the quality of arrows which would have been posted for various archers. This box was made by Buchanan. It is an example of craftsmanship. It's not dovetailed at the ends, but it's made of very good quality pine with a catch. These would have been sealed with string and possibly with ordinary brown paper for shipping through the postal service to various destinations. That one here, which is on display, for instance, was supplied to Lady Wood at Holmer Park in Hereford. So you can see their destination was extensive right the way through the United Kingdom. We move forward to where there's another arrow box here, was on display, and there's also some bows here which are very, very important. I'm very pleased to say that these two bows here in particular have joined the collection, and they were made in actual fact by Aldred, possibly for the Great Exhibition when he came across, and this was for Napoleon III. And you can see it's a wonderful piece of an extract either of Spanish or Italian yew. It's a quality product, and you can see in extract merely by the horns which are shaped at the bottom how magnificent this particular bow is. And it carries on here a band, it's a silver band, made for Napoleon III, and it's engraved accordingly. There are two such bows of this nature, and they were made at the time of the Great Exhibition when he visited it in Crystal Palace in London. This is quite a remarkable bow too. I think its provenance is Scottish, and it's actually got silver string nocks for the top and bottom of the bow. It's also fluted. The wood, I'm uncertain, but it obviously is not of this country. The reason why it's fluted is because it gives extra strength to the limbs, and you can see that by its design, its craftsmanship is superb. Its derivation, I think, is Scottish. It could be made, in actual fact, by a bowyer at a Royal Company of Archers in Edinburgh. This bow here is by Waring of London, and this is a very, very early manufacture, and is obviously quite a rare piece now as an archery bow, long bow. You can see by the horn it's very, very distinctive, and finishes with a banner at the top, which is indicative of bows by either Waring or Ham, H-A-M-M, who were very early bow makers, you know, to the Toxophilite Society. 35 to 40 of the carrying cases within the collection, most of which are in very fine condition. For instance, there's one, in actual fact, which I'm looking at the back here, which was in the possession of C.W. Nettleton of the Tunbridge Wells Archery Club. Mrs. Nettleton was lady champion in 1946 in the European Championships, which is the first one which was held after the Second World War. And if it wasn't for ladies during that particular period, then archery would have not had its uplift, which immediately followed the interest in archery following the Second World War. Archery clubs were usually wholly, if not entirely, their membership was built up by ladies. This very large oil painting of Diana the Huntress came to the collection from an auction house in Sussex, and on collection the auctioneer said, "Sir, you will not get that picture into your car," little realising in actual fact its size. If you look carefully into the left hand, you will see her recurve bow. It's glorified by her dress and by her general presentation. These are silver net purses, and they contain shillings, and you will note in actual fact that there is a ring at the top of each purse, and these were suspended from chatelaines. Now they were worn by ladies, obviously, in referring to chatelaines, and they were usually carried by archers either in such form or by personal leather holders in which shillings were fitted, and they were awarded to ladies shooting perfect 3 arrows to the gold at either 50 or 60 yards in competitions. And should a lady manage to shoot 3 arrows to the gold, then ladies contributed joyously by parting with 1 shilling to reward that archer. Adjacent to these prominent bows which have been exhibited is a leather quiver, a remarkable, in actual fact, what I call a piece of equipment, they predate the tollware, the tin quivers, the actual Cornish tin quivers, which were made in Cornwall, and our acquisition for this museum, because you would not find them today. So they were very early containers for arrows, and the revival of archery really started in the 18th century. I would think the date of those particular leather quivers would be somewhere region in the period of mid-18th century. Now, one particular royal member of in the archery world who was instrumental in the rise and interest in archery as a pastime was the Prince of Wales, who later became George IV. And in this little cabinet here is a very interesting item, because there's a horse blinker from the carriage that carried the then Prince of Wales to become George the IV in his coronation. So that's a very interesting item, and relates directly to the Prince of Wales and George IV's interest and participation in archery. He was responsible really for the encouragement and membership to join the Royal British Bowmen, and he was persuasive in bringing into the society of ladies, which made it even a more popular meeting place for both ladies and gentlemen to meet and to partake in the practice of archery. He was also the patron of the Royal Kentish Bowmen, who were shooting at Dartford Heath. So he would come down by barge, alight at Dartford, and then go to Dartford Heath to shoot. And the meetings took place from May right the way round through to September, from about 1791 until 1798, at least until the period of the outbreak of the Napoleonic Wars. There are various arrowheads, some of which in actual fact have been recovered from the battlefields of France by metal detectors, shot by English bowmen, which are on display here. And there's also other arrowheads which are also on display in this particular cabinet as well. Interestingly, those people who have had the good fortune of going to Azincourt, not Agincourt, it's spelt with the G is replaced with a Z, in France, which is not so very far away from Calais. And I do advocate, if those possible who are able to make this journey, to visit Azincourt, because the French have made a splendid museum from this battle, which was a bloodthirsty battle between the French and the English archers. There's various medals of interest in these various cases which surround this area. There's a collection of at least 4 Royal British Bowmen badges which are here, which relate to the year of about 1820 to 1830, which are very important contributions to the collection. And there are 2 very rare Grand National Archery Society awards, national awards, which in no way will be replicated today. Moving over, this has been the donation made to the Beechingwood collection here, which shows the library of the late Keith Calder. Keith, you could say, was a gentleman, and just merely looking at his photograph is indicative of his benign nature, and he was a very considerate person and well respected in the archery world. But his library collected is here for people to admire and to refer to should they so wish to do so. Keith's wish that it should join the collection here. For rare prints, I only know of another set which I'm pleased to say is held and conserved at the Royal Toxophilite Society's ground in Burnham in Archer's Lodge. And it shows prints which show a lady, a Victorian lady, bracing her bow at the top at the pre-draw stage of shooting, one at full draw and the other at loosing. And as a set, I'm very pleased to say that they are here within the collection. Now, I'm standing in front of what we call carrying Aschams. They were familiarly known as coffins. The bows were usually strapped in the top of the lid, and then the arrows and the arm guards, etc., or fingertips, as the case may be, or tabs, were stored in the lower section with arrow sets. And they're all usually made by possibly prominent Bowyers. Algery was one of the principal manufacturer of Aschams. A lot were made for local gentry in the 18th and 19th centuries, and even into the 20th century, by local carpenters. So the bow cases would have been very important, not only at the time of the horse and carriage, but also with the arrival of the steam train, which really did set archery into a course of progress, because archery meetings could be held throughout the British Isles. That bow there was made by Richard Head, which demonstrates the strength of some of the bows which were shot. You would have to be very, very strong through the arm and also the shoulder, to shoot such a weapon. These bows are not made from English yew, I'm afraid, but most bows and bow staves were either imported from Spain or from Italy. But that gives some idea of the strength of these bows which have been made. This is a little cabinet here, and the design of the cabinet is exquisite because it was designed to hold, again, archery for recreational purposes. And this bow here, which I'm just going to take out from its little keep, is a fascination because it's a recurve bow, would have come in from China, and it is used for, again, for either hunting purposes or for indoor shooting. So you can see the degree of skill in the making of that bow. The horn, no doubt, would have been steamed into place, to make that particular bow possible for shooting. And you will notice the string would be supported at the end here on the horn and would loop round at the top, so as to give it even a better ability for cast. These arrows in the stand would have been original. That would be of the age of the late 19th century. And would have been used for the purpose of recreational shooting. We now go down away from the Japanese bows and arrows onto Chinese bows. They were again very skilled in their manufacture. And to give some example of bows, this one here is a Chinese strength test bow, and they used to test the strength of archers. Notice how wide it is. To draw that bow back, you'll be pulling somewhere in the region of about 200 pounds in draw weight. So if you had 200 pounds in weight, which are on there, and you lifted it, if you managed to lift 200 pounds, but you imagine trying to draw it across your shoulder. So it's a strength bow. It's quite fascinating, an unusual item, and that's because it was little used. It has been able to remain here today. I've seen several examples of strength bows, but the quality of Chinese bows are exceptional. And they do get confused with Mongolian bows. You may say, well, they're part and parcel of the same nation, but they're not. The Mongolian bow is distinctly different from the Chinese bow. And there are examples here of Chinese work and of Mongolian work as well. In this particular rack, having lifted this particular bow out, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 examples of Chinese bows. Most of them have heavy draw weights. I would think overall the average draw weight of these bows would be somewhere in the region between 60 and 80 pounds in draw weight. And below that is one particular case there, which the bow would slip in. If they're riding on a horse, they would have strapped to the side a quiver, which invariably would be by a separate strap around the horse's waist to hold it into position, but the bow would slip in to that particular case. Now, the artistry in making these cases was quite important and reflected the standing of an archer, in other words, not only by his rank, but possibly by his also prosperity. Mixed amongst this display are bows from South India and from Mongolia. We see here also other Indian bows, more modern, which is one behind here. That bow there was manufactured in the 20th century, but it is a replica of a horn bow. There are two there actually. Usually the Chinese bows have got string guides which are mounted on the limb, which can be readily seen like this, which are attached where the string goes over the top, what they call string bridges. The various types, which gives it some age of the bow. That, I think, bow would be somewhere in the region of about the 17th or 18th century. But the string keeper gives a guidance where it's being manufactured. And that is why I immediately knew these were bows from China, simply because of the string bridges. They were used part and parcel of bow making of Chinese bows. But the majority of bows from China would have string bridges. The craftsmanship just didn't stay with China and Japan. They also spread into India. Northern India produced some very, very fine bows, and one can just see in actual fact the degree of skill in the making and finishing of, say, a bow of that nature, which is in the centre there, with its painting work, very, very finely finished, and is a tribute to the manufacture of bows which have come out from northern India, which is now part of Pakistan. While I didn't lift out that particular bow from the collection, there's one there which can be readily inspected if I lift it out carefully. Now that came in from the Edward McEwen collection. You can see the beautiful work which is accomplished on that Indian bow. It is a lovely piece of work which would have taken many, many hours to paint. I would say possibly a few hundred hours to finish. So the string would come from there. These limbs would come round from there all the way round and come here. So there would be a perfect bow to be used. So you would be shooting, holding the bow there in the middle, and the bow string would come on the exterior side of the bow. Persia also had some incredible bow makers, very, very similar, and the artistry of those bows are to be highly commended. The design and finished work on them is superb. So the manufacture of bows didn't rest with the material of wood and horn which came in from India. The Indian nation were very skilled in metalwork and way in front of making steel, and the art originated from India, and they designed some of the first steel bows, and we have got examples of the steel bow which are here on this particular part. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steel bows, and you can see that they were very, very skillfully made in foundry, and they were effective in warfare and also in shooting the bow for pleasure. So one mustn't actually dismiss India as a steel maker, because they had such wonderful skills in the manufacture of steel way back in the 17th century, and particularly in sword making. They were extremely skillful, and also in putting patterns to the steel. These steel bows were very, very well shaped and demonstrates the skill. And I think the word is Damascene, and that bow, you can see it as a steel bow from India. I mean, the pattern is perfect. Very fine bows. Now the steel bow, the modern steel bows, originated from Sweden, and by 1937 CFAB, who were making steel, and they produced what they call the CFAB bow, which was then exported to America and also to other sporting areas in the world practicing archery, and they would have reached England by 1937-38 period, just before the outbreak of the Second World War. But then Eccles and Pollock from Birmingham, they produced some very, very fine bows, and that's really what motivated archery and for people to take up archery, because they were very reasonable. I mean, if you think you could buy a steel bow in those days for about £12, so you can understand, although obviously inflation has now possibly made them incomparable to somewhere region where it could be tenfold that sort of figure. It was still a very cheap bow and enabled archery clubs to grow by the use of the steel bow. So steel for the manufacture of bows really originated from India. To see this quality steel bow, in fact in the hand would be, if it was weighed, would be somewhere in the region of the weight of about between 14 and 20 pounds in carrying weight. So quite a heavy bow. Arrows which are made out of steel, and they would have been shot with the steel bows, and they are here on separate stand. Again, they're not commonly found now, and they are of a particular interest to me because they follow through with the art of fletching with the modern material. They would be somewhere in the region, age-wise, of about the 18th century. I would think 18th century, yes. The Indians, in actual fact, were using materials which were common, to the area. And these are a reed, and these would have been harvested and then selected out for making arrows. So these are reed arrows, and thoroughly dried, they were strong, would have been used in warfare or for the purpose of hunting, but certainly not for the luxury of shooting arrows as a pastime. We now move to other locations in the world. There's another Japanese bow here. It's not quite where I would like it to go, but obviously we're running out of room here. And some interesting bows from various other parts of the world. These two bows here are Thai bows from Thailand. 1, 2 from Thailand. Now, they're, I think, in actual fact, in many ways, an interest may be possibly to tourists, but I'm not quite sure of the history of them, those particular two bows which are there. But there are two very fine bows which are around the corner from Thailand, which are exceptional. and extremely difficult to find. Two bows from Siam, which are quite rare. The workmanship is splendid. They're made of horn. From what creature I do not know. But they're hinged below this binding, and that part there hinged, and it comes back onto the top limb. What it is doing is holding it in place by the upper limb, which is rather remarkable. The only reason why I know that is because on one bow the binding was off, and this would fold right back and was pinned beneath. So when it was bound, the actual limb comes back, the top part, onto the frontage of the bow. So what it does in fact is the horn makes a perfect recurve bow. Now you can see how it's been designed with a handle. So the actual horn is working right through here. So there'll be two separate horns there which meet underneath the handle. And that is supported by the strength of the handle here, which is wood itself, and then covered with this lovely material. I've never seen bows of this quality before. So I was very fortunate to gain these two bows. One in particular there is a black horn, and this is a white horn. Now, there are some interesting bows a little further up. It's very unusual to find an Eskimo bow, but I'm just going to take it out of its place. That is an Eskimo bow, and it would be made out of horn, and as you can see it here, that they've used all natural materials to make this bow, and the back has got a laminate of cord. Where that's been originated from, I'm unaware, but it's been matted together and then glued and then bound together to the original horn here. Now that's the only bow which I've seen at that standard of workmanship, but these were used for shooting seals and other, shall we say, water-borne animals. And it's very unusual to find a bow of that nature, and they are now a rarity. I'm very pleased to say we've got an example of an Eskimo bow. Arrows also here which reflect the craftsmanship of the Eskimo. That would be an arrow here with obviously a bone or walrus tusk, and obviously salvaged from the sea, which possibly is floated from somewhere. But it's a very interesting arrow which would have been used The most interesting thing is two cases of Eskimo arrows, and they're here. And the ones which will be where my hand points there would be for shooting the fish, which is at the surface, or for birds, wildfowl in other words. So there's 1, 2, 3. Now they're quite a rare arrow, and that's why they're in a case here. They're in very good condition, and I would think they would be unattainable today. The bows at the top rack and the lower ones are from Mongolia. The two lower bows are from southern India. The Turkish sultans were experts in using the crab bow, and these bows here are particularly in from Turkey. They are defined really as crab bows. The bow in actual fact comes back right the way around this length. They're called crab bows from Indo-Persia and also from Turkey. Now they came out by Royal Dalton under the Greenwood Tree series, which depict the adventures of Robin Hood in the 19th century and were manufactured to encourage the practice of archery. So they would be in hotels and in stately homes that would come out on festive occasions, to celebrate archery as a whole. These paddle type bows are from the Andaman Islands. They're unique in their design. So the string would come round here, held in the middle. It is this in actual fact which gives the cast of the bow and the strength of the bow. The Andaman Islands, I'm very pleased to say there's 4 bows in the Andaman Islands. The Andaman Islands do not welcome visitors, and as a consequence, if you were to land on one of the Andaman Islands, then you could well be confronted with arrows shot from these bows. These bows here are from northern India, and they're rather unique in their own right because they're nicely and very artistically decorated, and again are peculiar to that part of India. They're not readily found, and certainly not with the decor which is on them. And the Japanese bow is ones which are made out of laminations of special bamboo. Now bamboo is a grass, and there are many grasses who make up the family of the bamboo species. And in China, Tonkin cane is said to be one of the best canes for making bows. It's very, very resilient and strong. It doesn't split, and also has an ability to return to its original shape, in other words where it was straight, and enables an arrow to fly free and quickly away from the string when drawn. Now, the Japanese introduced a short limb at the bottom and a long limb at the top. And this example of bowery is common with the Japanese bow. That's the only nation who designs its bows. And I just carefully lift this particular bow out, and you will see that it's got a very short limb at the bottom and a very long limb at the top. Now they are laminates in actual fact. Later models were glued, but the early bows were slipping over each other, the laminates were slipping over each other, and they were bound and possibly even steamed into position. That's what's created the use of bamboo. So they were held in the middle, like that, and shot accordingly by the extension of the arm, of course. And that is a very fine example of a Japanese bow. There are various types of models here of Japanese bows. That's one of the nicest creation which is in the collection here. But there are other examples. That, for instance, is a different design. That's a more modern design. And that one recently, and that's made of fiberglass. But that will be used for competitive shooting within their galleries. The Japanese are very enthusiastic about archery. And they designed from about the time of the 16th century, may have been earlier, I'm not quite sure, as and when the shooting galleries were designed or made or erected. But there are many, many examples of shooting galleries in Japan. They're used in many ways on a spiritual basis, and the degree of skill by using possibly the advantage of psychology, and they call it the Zen in the art of archery, whereby the archer who would be shooting would sit in meditation about where the arrow is going to be directed. And when the mind is absolutely free of all concepts, whether it's food, whether it's music, or even the enjoyments of life, he will then draw up the bow and take aim for the middle. And when completely relaxed, that arrow will find its way to the mark. In other words, if there's a white target with a black spot, that arrow will land very near its destination. And by just looking around here, photographically, they will be here to be in various styles, but they all have the concept of shooting at the lower limb, with the upper limb from the handle being at least twice the length of the lower limb. There are sets of archery equipment which is used by modern archers with its quiver and bow, and I'm very pleased to say that there are adherents of the Japanese bow shooting in this country today in the British Isles who are shooting solely for leisure purposes. That is a modern Japanese bow, which is a laminate. It's got bamboo, but in both sides of the limb, but it's got laminates and wood. I've no idea of its bow weight, but I should imagine it could readily shoot at 100 metres because of the strength which would be required to shoot this bow. And you can see craftsmanship within the making of the bow. With the laminates, it would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 laminates. Archery in Japan has produced some interesting items. The work and lacquer work, which obviously, and outer rings which cover the material for holding the bow together, is finished in lacquer work. And the Japanese use lacquer in many degrees, possibly even for containing culinary works, or alternatively, as I said, in archery as well. Now, that bow here is one which has been crafted out of bamboo, and as you can see, it's very ornate and is finished to a high standard. In this display there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yew bows, which are reproduction of bows which would have been shot in the medieval period, and particularly examples. This example here is one from the Merry Rose. Now, it's not English yew, it is American yew, but a very good example of a stave that was used in the 100-Year War with the French. Several of the bows would have been made by Richard Head, a bowyer in Wiltshire. Richard is a fine bowyer of modern longbows, but his examples here of replicated yew bows from the Middle Ages are excellent.